When the tractor arrived, it shouted, "Nobody cares. I do."
Welcome to episode 12 of the 755 Followed Me Home project.
The Overbought 755 was missing a grill and side panels. It had a hole in the hood and an engine that wouldn't start. It wasn't much to look at. So part 2 is about tightening linkage around the waist and doing away with blotches and wrinkles with rattle can cosmetics from Rust-Oleum and John Deere paint. There's considerable wear in the linkage of the hydrostatic pedals. That rear joint is what's responsible for that much play in this pedal.
That's the reverse joint.
And the outboard joint is responsible for this much play. This is the kind of wear that accumulates on those universals. I don't know if you can see it down in there. These all will roll around, and the only way to fix it is to replace that end. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is knock this universal joint loose. Put an 11 mil there, and a 12, and break the lock nut loose. I just let them sit right where it was, and then I screw the new one down against that, and it should keep the lengths approximately the same. Underneath, we can see there is considerable wear in the outer and inner bushings that support the pedals. To get the removal party started, remove rear linkage bolt and outer link. The outer pedal can now be rotated clockwise when viewed from under the tractor to allow a punch to align with and remove the spring pin. Note that John Deere Engineering rotated and bored the holes to enhance access for spring removal and installation. With the link and pin removed, simply take the pedal assembly out of the frame. Well, I measured that set of bushings, found an 11/16 socket and some 1/2-inch extensions that I have used before, and my trusty 2-pound hammer to see if she'll move. Let's do it again. Yep, started moving. Let's go ahead. I like that sound. We're driving 2 out. Now we want to see that that lever is out of the way on the back side. The next task is to install these 2 bushings in the frame. They live in there about this far apart. There's a grease zerk in between them to spread grease into both of the bearings. Now, since I can't get in there with a hammer, I'm going to use this driver, which is a 3/4 by 7/8. Put a washer on it. This will go inside the frame. This will come through the frame, then be pulled in by this bolt. I'll put a little bit of lubrication inside the frames to pull this bushing. And once that one is in, then we'll reverse the process by putting this one on the front and probably some spacers to pull her back in. So that's what's next. This is a view of the outside of the bearing support. And this is a view of the inside of the bushing support. I'll put a little bit of assembly lube in there. And some of our bushing. And then pull her through. Put some assembly lube on the bolt. I had to use 2 different washers there because I didn't have one with a small enough center in it. So I guess we're going to call this a bushing puller. We'll get her snugged up there a little bit. Make sure we feel like everything is in alignment and in the center. I'm going to use a 19mm box end on the head of the bolt. And I don't have a 19 socket handy, so I'm going to use a 3/4 on my ratchet. And we'll put a little pressure on it. I'm going to go underneath and see what it looks like. Now we'll put a washer on there and pull it down flush. Now we go on to the front one. Okay, I've put some assembly lube around that bushing. And we put our bushing driver. Washer. Center everything. Pull the bushing into the frame. There we go. Now we just need to slip them . This one can hang there. This one, I have to put a strap around it to hold it up. Now that we've got the pedals in, the shafts in, we put 3 washers, spacers in there. And now we're going to take the control rod for the reverse pedal and the speed control or cruise control lever and bring it in. Now I was like, since this is in sort of a precarious place, I'm going to start the spring pin . Bring the both pedals up and force them in. So I kind of keep an eye on where that hole is. We're about there. Now what I have, if I can find it, I have a little bolt I put in that hole to fish. And there it is. I found the hole in the shaft. Now, take our favorite 2-pound hammer. Push the spring pin in. Make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be. And then we'll drive that spring pin into where it needs to rest. There we are. With the pedals installed, we continue by putting in the forward linkage, held with an 11mm there and a 13 on the outside. The other end, we'll get the bolt. A spacer. The reverse
kind of hard to keep my hands out of the way and show you where this stuff goes. I'll assemble it and then you can see it. Ooh, there. There. And then the smaller spacer. And then the nut. It's really not that difficult. It's just trying to show you by getting my hands in the way. All we need to do is tighten up the nuts. And the spring is preloaded to a length of 5 1/4 inches. There we go.
When replacing linkage parts, the pedals may change their relative position. Here, the reverse pedal almost contacts the footplate and needs adjustment. This is accomplished by changing the length of the control rod inside the frame. Loosen the lock nuts on each end and turn the shaft to change the pedal alignment. A good coat of paint can protect a surface, or it can hide corrosion and rust that's going to come back and fight you at another time. When I bought this tractor, it looked like it had been living most of its life in the bottom of a salt mine. The fenders were pitted badly, and for an experiment, I took some rust preventive paint, brushed it on, let that dry good, touched it off with some sandpaper, and then put some green paint on it. And that was about 5 years ago, and the surface is still pretty good. But here's something I wanted to show you. On the side cover, I didn't sandblast these, I just painted them, sanded and painted. And here's what happens with the later model tractors. There was a little crack right here. I wasn't able to get the paint all underneath it cleared off, and water has just flowed into the top, and it's rusting away down below. So here's an example of what will happen if paint is just applied over some of that chipping paint that was so popular in the 90s. So fortunately, I have some pieces of the old style paint and the new style paint, and we'll start out showing you what the difference is in how those two paints appear and what it takes to clean them up and prepare them to do some painting. On the later model panels that have the paint chipping, it's easier to chip this paint off so you can get down to the metal. And this is really the better candidate for sandblasting than the pre-89 paint jobs. Assuming you don't have access to a sandblaster, you can do this with some elbow grease. So what the first thing you do is, of course, take any loose grease or paint off like that. It'll come off, but I'm going to get the loose stuff off so that it won't clog the pores on the sanding disc. And so let's see how it looks. Put on my ear protection. We'll get started. Don't know how well you can see it, but this bolt was tightened and enough to pull that metal down, deform it. So you got rust around there, can't sand it out. So we'll just take our favorite 2-pound hammer. Bring it back to where we can feel it. Just as well do it with these others while we're at it. You might think that, well, you get this all sanded down and this paint won't come off, then you're good. But underneath this paint, let me see if I can find this spot here. When you get it off of there, you're still going to find rust underneath it. It just never got bonded to the metal. So this takes a while. I've always taken it to Sandblaster, but if you can't, then I suppose you're at your own devices to use some rust preventive primer, something. What you want to do is seal these surfaces between where the metal and the paint end, so the water doesn't get through the paint and into that. So you need a good sealer, and don't talk to me, but because I just don't know any more about it. Talk to a good painter or somebody that knows more than this old shade tree painter mechanic. That won't sand down, not without a lot of rough paper and a lot of work. And here's the result. That moisture will get underneath the paint, it just stays there and pits the metal. Side panels with the earlier green paint are easier to sand. Down here you can see where the overspray was sprayed on there thinly, and we can take it all off down to the original paint.
So with some of that discussion out of the way, follow me as I show you how I was preparing the sheet metal for the Overbought 755.
From 20 feet the paint looked okay, but on closer inspection showed a combination of spray and brushed on paint covering chipping and missing paint, but worse than that, hidden rust. Now that's what we've got to get rid of. Since the hood was going to be patched and painted, an appointment was made to blast the sheet metal pieces and move on. I'd worked with this operator before, and he was careful to use enough pressure and distance to remove paint and cause minimal pitting of the metal. In this neck of the woods, we don't have a lot of choices. You may be able to find a soda or a dry ice blaster that don't appear so dramatic, and that's worth looking into. For this project, I'll apply an extra coat or two of primer and sand in between to smooth the parts to my liking. To give you a feel for how the process looks, watch as the fender is blasted. High humidity or dry, I prefer to protect new open surfaces with self-etching primer. The idea is to treat any remaining rust and prevent new from forming. After a few minutes, you can see thin areas and apply another coat. Been saving the new can for the fenders. We want to get up underneath here, all these pieces. The sheet metal will take two 12-ounce cans and part of a third. The fenders take one of those cans by themselves. After the etching primer is dry, I'll apply at least 2 liberal coats of primer sealer. And here we go. It's nice that it's a different color than the etching primer so we can see where it's been applied. I've laid on a pretty wet coat right there where the feet will be wearing on that blade. So the last thing to do for this episode is touch up that overspray, but before that can be done, the frame needs a good cleaning. The first thing I do is spray on a liberal amount of degreaser and let it soak. It takes several wash, rinse, repeat cycles to get things clean, but it's certainly worth it. Well, we'll see if we can clean up this frame a little bit. This is pretty badly pitted down in here. This isn't so bad, but it looks bad. So just take a wire brush and get down into some of those holes. And get the loosest stuff that we can get out. Again, we're not trying to make a factory new restoration of this tractor. What we want to do is get rid of the overspray and fix some of these rusty areas, leaving as much of the original paint and patina as we can. Run it around. Previous painter had applied some flat, you can feel it here, some sort of a paint on it. Scratch it off. It's pretty hard to sand it off. But it does. But since this has got some missing paint here, I'm going to touch this paint up with the best I can find, which is the Blitz Black from John Deere.
Looking at the checklist, the transmission linkage is in, overspray and missing paint have been touched up, sheet metal is primed, and all the parts are in for the Overbought 755 and 855 engines. So which one of these blocks will be the next project? 3TN72, the 3TN75. Thank you for watching.